What I thought we could do is have another look at one of Phillipa's videos, which is about doing the long and short stitch as soft shading using 3 colours, because that's most of this design, that's what we'll be doing. So let's have a look at Phillipa's video.
Long and short, using more than 3 colours. As you can see in this Jacobean design, Jacobean idyll, there are many colours going down through the hummocks or the hillocks below these sweet little rabbits. So as you can see, the yellow goes through the blues into greens and into deep blues at the bottom or very dark greens. This is very typical of late 17th century crewel work, when they had access to these fabulous colours and designs. The piece I'm stitching on today, however, is from Glamis Castle, worked by the Queen's grandmother, and is of the arts and crafts era. So I'm going to show you on the thistle head, long and short as soft shading in 4 colours, but on a small shape, because very often when I'm teaching classes, this is something that worries people and they feel quite insecure about it. So this is to teach you to stitch with real confidence. Now I've marked the stitching lines of the first colour, which I do on all my kits and designs, and even if I'm designing it myself and I know where those stitches are going to go, I would mark these in pencil so that these are long and then about 3/4 length for the first colour of the soft shading. This gives me the direction of the stitches for all the following colours. Now to begin with, I find a long stitch approximately in the centre of that shape, and I come up and I take my thread up and then down beyond the point of that little pointy shape here in the thistle. That's my long stitch, and then I look to the shorter stitches to see the length and direction of those shorter stitches. They're not really half the length of the first one, they're more 3/4 of the length. Now this comes up right next to the original stitch and again goes down just beyond the blue printed line. Now these lines don't wash out, so you must cover them and cover them thoroughly. So I'm stitching very thickly right next to each other. So I've gone from a point down to the base of this little hill, and now I'm going to the next point. So I'm again picking the long stitch that divides that little shape in half and then working back towards the first little hill there. So I work across this shape in long and shorter stitches deep into the shape, and then where the next little pointed area begins there, I stop stitching and I go to the centre of that pointed area. I come up and down over the point like that, and then fill in the gap with another stitch. So as you can see, these little points are being worked one at a time in sections. Now dividing a shape into little sections like this makes you stitch in the correct angle for that shape. So this works with anything. This works with an animal's back, working it in sections. This works with a multi-petaled flower. Just keep the direction in the same direction as nature would intend. Now I've just run out of thread in this, so I'm going to come back in a minute. Now if you find that you've left little gaps between the points here and they're not smooth enough for you, or not fat enough and full enough to look generous and fluffy for the end of a thistle head, you can go over this area again after you've worked the whole area in the same colour. So you use the first colour again in a single thread using the same method, and you just go over the top, and that gives you the most wonderfully 3D effect as I've worked here. So this is a double thread worked in exactly the same way as I've just showed you, and a single thread is worked over the top. So before you finish this with this colour, you repeat the same thing again. As you can see, I'm resisting the temptation to turn the angle of my stitches so that they become like a fan. Keep them straight up and down, like this. And use the point of your needle to tuck the last thread in behind the second last thread. So that's as much fanning as I would really be comfortable with. Then look across your piece. If there are any gaps, you can put in a thread, or you could, as I said, work across the shape with a single thread to make a really full fluffy area. So I've worked one half of the first colour. Now I'm going to take my thread across the back of my work and continue by beginning with a 3/4 stitch on the opposite side. So I again work to the base of one of these little pointy areas and then jump to the middle of the next pointed area like that and work back, thus keeping the direction. So you're just working in little sections all the time. As you can see, it uses up plenty of thread, and that's absolutely fine. Long and short soft shading, second colour. Now, I put this area in using all the marked lines as a guide to the length and direction of my stitch. For the second and the subsequent colours, we don't have the marked lines, otherwise it would just be covered in blue and very confusing. So we use the first layer of stitching to keep our direction. Now, the first colour came up in the body of the seed head and went down over the edge. Thus we could see exactly where to put the needle. This time we're going to come up through a long stitch near the point of this area, very near the tip, and I'm going to bring the thread down in the opposite direction. So I lay my thread all the way down and pop my finger on the top so that I can see that this wool on the top, this purpley colour, is covering this beigey pink, but it isn't crossing it. So if you can see a shadow behind this second colour, then you know that it's in the wrong direction. What it should do is just snuggle in between two of the threads from the first colour. Now I'm going to pop this down, this needle down, just short of the next edge of the blue line, so the cup at the base of the thistle. So that's my first stitch. As you can see, it's a big long stitch, and the question is, where are we going to put the third and fourth colours? Well, these are actually going to run through all of these colours. So first stitch is long and all the way down beyond the first colour. The second stitch comes up right next to it to one side, and it's slightly shorter, slightly lower down the shape, and it goes down slightly higher. So the first stitch ends there, but this second stitch is going to end here, so just beyond the layer of the first colour. The next stitch comes up as a long stitch again. Now every time I do a long stitch, I lay the thread down just to keep the correct angle and pop the thread in. And a short one right next to that long stitch. And as you can see, I'm not bothering to divide the area up into short shapes because I have the direction of the stitches from the first colour. So as long as you lay the long threads, you can just work away quite quickly across the shape. So long, and sometimes that will hit the top of the next bit of the design. And long and shorter at both ends. And that covers the area quite well, so nearly all of this space is taken up just with the first two colours. Work to the edge, and with a thistle head I think I would put the colour right to the edge because that's what happens in nature, and then carry your thread, if you have any left, across to the other side and just continue in the same way, coming up through the first colour with a shorter one, and then the long one, laying the thread down as before. Just continue that colour until you reach the other side. When you look across your work, you might find that the first colour has a thread that sticks up, and very often this is the first colour, the very backbone stitch. Now, to correct that, I'm coming up through the middle of it, splitting that stitch and pulling it down, and you'll see that that stitch just works really well now, and the surface of the work, the plane across the top, is quite smooth. Now we're going to go on to the third colour. As you can see, I've gone into a deeper shade as I progressed down the piece. Now this third colour can go all the way down to the next area, because I'm only going to use the fourth colour for a tiny little accent. So, as we did with the second colour, I want you to lay your thread down, holding it down with your finger, and as you hit the outer line of the cup underneath the thistle, you're going to just go down on that blue zigzag line. So just follow that, which is very easy because it's all there for you, and you're going to make a long and then a shorter line like that. So long, like this, and shorter. Now, the gentler the shading from one shade to the next, the easier this is. So when you make a very large piece, remember to choose very softly changing colours and work them one at a time. I wouldn't leap from a bright yellow to a navy blue because it will never look really beautiful. So I'm just coming up through the first colour and going down, and occasionally I throw a really long thread up through the first two colours, almost to the top of the second colour, and that gives a far more natural look. It's very easy to end up with sets of stripes, so you need to accentuate the zigzag of the long and the short. So I've put in the colour for that side, and as you can see, as you go down through the colours, you're actually using a lot less wool and fewer stitches. But you must cover the area and make sure the linen doesn't show through. So again, occasionally I put a long stitch in, hold the thread down and pop that needle through. Long and short soft shading with 4 colours, and we're now using the fourth colour. I'm only going to use one length of thread because I'm just putting this deepest colour in as a little bit of interest at the base of the thistle head. So again, we begin with the waist knot on the top, the 3 little seeding stitches, and that waist knot will be chopped off at the end of our stitching, or actually right now because I'm finding it's rather in the way. Now I'm stitching this whole piece upside down so that you can see it clearly, but normally I work from the thistle head down towards the root. So normally my stitching will always come towards me, and I find the weight of my hand actually helps with my tension of my stitching. But don't worry too much about being too neat, because actually nature isn't neat, and it really looks far better if you're relaxed and happy. I always think your state of mind shows very clearly in your stitching. So if you're having a bad day, do some very complicated stitching and forget about your bad day. But this is a very soothing stitch, and I know that you're going to enjoy it, because once people learn this stitch, that's the thing they want to do most of all. And it is actually quite quick, because there is no background to stitch in crewel work. You're actually only stitching the interesting bits.
Well, that was really useful, and that set me up for my stitching tonight.